Okay, thanks very much. I'm afraid it's a night of a bunch of different introductions. I'm Damien White, Dean of Liberal Arts. It's a pleasure and honour to welcome you to tonight's discussion, Decolonizing Design, Imagining Futures. And we're going to have a really nice conversation here tonight. We've deliberately tried to set things up so there's going to be a really good extended discussion between you, the panellists, and our key speaker tonight, Arturo Escobar. So please, a round of applause for Arturo. So very excited. Arturo will be engaged with, and we will be enriched by further presentations by RISD faculty, Namita Dharia of History, Philosophy, Social Science professor, Jess Brown, our Industrial Design professor, Ramon Tejada, and a professor in graphic design, and Ijlal Muzaffar, professor in theory and history of art and design. So just say a few brief words. This particular program emerged out of a collaboration between the RISD Museum and at the moment it's running a design and repair and design futures exhibit, which the curator, Kate Irvin, has put on. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, please do. Lots of people have been involved in that. And Kate, Sarah Gantz-Blythe and the amazing Deb Clements approached Liberal Arts at the beginning of the year and said they would love to bring Arturo to RISD. Let's make this happen. So we've been working on that. Part of this event, I just want to mention, is co-sponsored by a new master's program that RISD is launching next year. This is a master's program in global arts and culture. So if you're interested in any of the conversations that you hear tonight, please Google RISD Global Arts and Culture. And I'm looking at Eric Anderson there, that young man with the beard, who is the GPD for Global Arts and Culture and has really done an amazing job pulling that whole graduate program together. So if you're interested in these kinds of conversations, please look that up, Google Global Arts and Culture at RISD, and you'll find a really amazing graduate program. So, and just one other note of information, Arturo's written this fantastic book, Designs for the Pluriverse, and tomorrow lunchtime in the gallery, in the exhibition gallery for Repair and Design Futures from 12:30 onwards, we're going to have a big old discussion, kind of freewheeling discussion about the book, and there'll be a whole bunch of RISD people there, RISD professors with Arturo. It's going to be very open-ended, and we just really invite you as members of the community to engage. If you haven't had a chance to read it, come along anyhow. We've had some wonderful seminars and discussions in that space this semester, so that's a really fun, interesting conversation to have. So then just very briefly, I will say a few words about Arturo and his project. Arturo's been one of the seminal figures in the social sciences for over 4 decades. If you Google scholar him, his citations are frighteningly large. He's Kenyan Distinguished Professor of Anthropology at UNC Chapel Hill. He's made interventions to so many debates, so development studies, and most recently cultural flows, globalization theory, but Designs for the Pluriverse is particularly a lovely book for us as a community of art and design education, because it's a book about what we do and what we think about. And many colleagues who have picked up this book have said to me, this is very annoying, this is exactly the book that I wanted to write, and he got there first, and he's done such a good job. So it's a great book. I'll just briefly say, in this text, Arturo does not flinch from clearly stating that we are in a crisis. We're in the midst of a multi-factorial climate, colonial, extractivist conflict crisis, which mainstream design is implicated in this crisis at every level, but at the same time inspired and mirroring the thoughts of Latin American indigenous black peasant activists and many other marginalised people around the world, he argues that within the context of this crisis, there are also many possibilities that could open up more hopeful futures. And Arturo both wants to critique design then, but argued that a design that is altered and reconfigured in more relational, ecological, decolonial and democratic ways, allied to the project of post-carbon transitions, could open up a very, very different way of thinking and making the world. So rather than design being continually a force that just closes down and offers a voice for an elite culture to impose what Arturo calls the one world, Arturo takes inspiration from the Zapatistas, and he wants to map out in this book a politics of design which actively wants to decolonialise our thinking and practices, open ourselves up to the concept of the pluraliverse, and conceptualise something beyond this one world, this singular vision of the future. We need a world of many worlds, a world of different kinds of world making where many different kinds of peoples and projects can fit. So this is a very hopeful project. It's a recuperative project, and we're going to bring it into dialogue with a whole range of exciting developments tonight that our RISD professors are engaged with, and we're just going to have a lot of fun. So without further ado, I'll invite Arturo up. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I would like to start by saying that it's a great honor for me to be here and be working on design, as Damian just mentioned, for a number of years. I mean, probably for about 10 years. Although I was around design in some sense for much longer. But I wanted to start by thanking the Dean of Liberal Arts, Professor Damian White, Miss Deborah. Hi, Deborah, how can I? Clemens. Sorry, blank out on your last name. And for director of the programs here at the museum for her very efficient organizing and infrastructure for these events. Professors Namita Dharia, Jess Brown, Ijlal Muzaffar, and Ramon Tejada as well for the participation in this session, and all of you for coming. And I'd like to start by, I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes or 30 minutes, and I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the title of the presentation and what I mean by political ontological praxis of repair. And repair is going to be, as I'm going to mention in the talk, I take from a very interesting concept being developed here at the museum for the Repair and Design Futures exhibit, where we're going to be tomorrow. And the praxis basically refers to an engaged kind of knowledge production for social transformation. And ontological for now, let's say that it refers to the fact that design is very much about the conditions for life. And then the conditions for creating different kinds of realities, different kinds of worlds and world-making practices. And so I'll give you a brief sense of the talk, beginning with, in a very intuitive way, with suggesting that civilizational crisis, a crisis of the current model of civilization, if you wish, that multifaceted crisis of climate, energy, poverty, inequality, meaning, and so forth, is the largest framework in which we can think and rethink design today, and also the largest framework in which we can think about alternative futures as well today, which is the topic for today, decolonizing design and alternative futures. And so I'll give you an intuitive sense for what that is. And then we move on to talk a little bit more about recent trends in design, in critical design studies, that precisely are focused on that new idea that design is about the conditions of life or the production of life and for the making of different kinds of worlds. And trends like design for social innovation, social intervention, transition design, autonomous design, decolonial design justice, and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what is exciting about that, what I find exciting about that, Along the way, I will tell you a little bit about an application that we're making in the region where I come from in Colombia, which is called, in Colombia, in the southwest of Colombia, which is called the Cauca River Valley, which is a transition design exercise for that region, and I'll explain that very briefly. That would be a different talk by itself. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about design as space, a domain for healing the web of life, for healing the meshwork, the network of interdependencies and interrelations that make up life. Okay, so to begin in a very intuitive way, again, this is by a Palestinian artist, Mona Hatoum, and what she suggests with this, she has a series called Hotspots. And Hotspots is about showing how the world is full of these spots of conflict, of intense conflict. Basically, the entire globe is involved in these kinds of conflicts. This is sort of done with sort of wires and neon lights. And the second one is obviously more literal. It's about global warming. I mean, we're burning the planet. So we are in this very deep and profound, unprecedented crisis today. And there are many ways to label, to name that crisis. And certainly that crisis is producing structural unsustainability. I know Tony Fry was here before. Tony Fry speaks a lot about this unsustainability and the futuring as well. This crisis is basically killing our possible futures and just giving us one possible future as the future. In France, there is this new sort of in fashion movement of collapsology or collapsology. A lot of people talking about collapse and trying to prepare for that collapse, some in interesting ways, some in very superficial ways. And the UK, some of you might have seen this movement called Extinction Rebellion, and this is rebelling for life. So this is definitely something that to be watching. They are going to be calling for civil disobedience, massive civil disobedience in relation to climate change policies as well. And unfortunately, the effects are not working, so it's just giving you the whole slide. It should appear at different moments, but that's fine. We'll just go with that as it is. What are some of the responses to this sense of crisis? From Latin America, indigenous peoples in particular always talk about what they call that the crisis of the contemporary moment is a crisis of a Western civilizational model, of a particular heteropatriarchal capitalist model of social life, and that we have to transition to a different set of civilizational models in plural. And that's, for instance, from an activist publication, Civilizational Alternatives. This is 10 years ago, mostly by activists writing about this concept of civilizational alternatives from in an indigenous summit on spirituality, suggesting that, or where capitalism goes, or the earth go, but capitalism and the earth cannot survive together at the same time as they are now, or the slogan from the World Social Forum that another world is possible, and obviously the Zapatista slogan that Damian also mentioned already, a world where many worlds fit. So moving from this idea that we have to fit into a single globalized world, coded in terms of capitalist markets and globalization and so forth, towards a different pluriverse of worlds where every world fits. And very much so, I mean, I've been collecting this art of relationality, these forms of art that depict the radical web of interdependencies that make up life. The basic idea being, and that's what we call radical relationality, that everything exists because everything else exists, and that precisely what has to be sustained, what has to be protected, is that intricate way of life that we are destroying left and right. And there's a lot of this art. And then what we see when we look at many social movements today in the global south, but also in the global north, that are arising or sort of mobilizing against extractive operations, destruction of natural resources for mining, for agrofuels, for mega development projects and so forth, what we see is that they are mobilizing from the perspective of that relational worlds of interdependence with which they still at least partially exist, within which there are many ways to depict relationality. Again, I'm sorry the effects are not working. This is from Lynn Margulis's concept of symbiogenesis. This is an artist that is doing this great work. There is a lot of work on, this is by Sadie Red Wing, Lakota graphic designer. who's doing these amazing things with the Lakota alphabet and comes up with these beautiful weavings and designs and so forth. Latin American indigenous weavings. So let's move quickly to what is it that we find very exciting. I mean, when I started reading about design again, is because I began to sense that there was a sort of a sea change happening in design studies, at least in critical design studies. It's unclear to what extent this is really going beyond the academy, beyond a certain group of design scholars, but certainly something is happening. Repair, I think, is a good metaphor for that, and I take this from the catalog for the exhibit. Repair is an expression of resistance to the unmaking of our world and of the environment. So they talk about mending as a visual and emotional aid to socially engaged design thinking, mending. So that what we can do is to mend the world, to repair the web of life, to heal, to redesign, to regenerate that web of life. This is not mending. These are some of the mainstream sort of design trends. This is from Bruce Mau in Toronto. I don't think I have to tell you who he is. He's very well known. Massive changes about the design of the world. But nevertheless, what I recall from this, which is very interesting, is there's a great acute awareness that design is about designing worlds. It's about designing the conditions of existence. It's not just about designing objects and so forth, but it's about designing who we are in the last instance. We can do everything. We can recreate the human. We can recreate the body. We can recreate the earth even maybe. Again, this is not about mending. This is another conventional imaginaries of design. Very interesting, automation, smart cities, etc., etc. This, unfortunately, again, I'm so sorry that this should have come up later, but nevertheless, this is from an otherwise interesting document from the Rem Koolhaas office in New York, a roadmap to a decarbonized Europe. But this is supposed to be sort of the European subject of 2050 with all these wearables and technological fits and so forth. And this is one of the things that I find very interesting from Mancini, that we are all designers. Design when everybody's a designer. That we are confronted, we are thrust onto the task of thinking clearly about how our lives are so amazingly thoroughly designed, and so to take charge of that designing, or the fact that we are being designed all the time ourselves. So all of the new trends, user-centered design, you know this very well. Maybe I'll flag for you the last two, transition design and autonomous design. I'm going to talk a little bit about those two. And again, the key sentence for me, the key idea is that design is emerging as a domain of thought and action concerning the production of life and the making of worlds. Design as a world-making practice. Tony Fry speaks about that in a very clear way. This is, for me, the most succinct definition of why do we need an ontological approach to design. And an ontological approach to design suggests that in designing tools, we are designing ways of life, ways of being, we're designing ways of knowing. That any tool, any invention, any intervention to the world, as a design intervention, as a design invention, has tremendous repercussions for the kinds of human beings that we are and the kinds of worlds we invent. Anne-Marie Willis's double formula for design: we design our worlds design us back. In the context of the cities, we design the cities, but we don't really know how the cities make us in the way in which we are. Okay. This is my own sort of peculiar, perhaps, mapping of trends in critical design studies. What I'm beginning to see is the emergence of a transnational critical design studies field, which emerges as a result of a conversation between the global north and the global south. And that involves some of these trends in the global north. I should have included here design justice, which is a very interesting one as well. Certainly design for social innovation and transition design. Talk a little bit about that in a moment. And then from the global south, many of these decolonization of design, mostly by African American and indigenous designers in the global north, or in the north. And designs from the south, altered design, autonomous design. It is yet unclear, some people claim that a new paradigm is emerging, or that at least that we need a new paradigm for design. I don't think that's happening. I don't think even more that design taken as a whole will continue to be more or less what it has been until now, but that more and more the space for doing a different kind of design and designing is widening, and we have to sort of, now that's a very important intellectual political project and professional practical political project. I like this from Design for Social Innovation. This is mostly from Mariana Matullo at the New School, at Parsons School of Design, when she says that designers are becoming aware of this new role for design, but we cannot yet articulate well, more precisely, neither the context nor the stakes nor the tasks to which we are summoned. So that's the predicament of design today, and then how can we match those two? And people that are beginning to work in that direction as well. This is from the PhD in Transition Design at Carnegie Mellon University. All of their material, by the way, is on their website. You can download course syllabi, workshops, all kinds of different materials that they have there, readings, and sort of organizing the design studies world into these different domains. We have, of course, service and products design. We have design for social innovation, which begins to poke at the edges of the paradigms of design as we know them. And then transition design that involves a more radical change. Again, a break with conventional paradigms of design and a break with the contemporary models of social life that we have today. We have this wonderful group in Boston, a design studio for social intervention. All right. I guess, I don't know if that might be a Yako, but it's so interesting that taking something, an intervention such as the social emergency response centers that enables creation of spaces that enable people to come and deal with questions about violence, sort of gender violence, racial violence, poverty, inequality, and so forth, but link it to more radical and more significant questions about the reassembling of the social, the redesign of the social, if you wish, so that we begin to widen the sphere of social transformation. It's a very interesting project, a very radical politics as well. From the Global South comes this idea of decolonizing design, of decolonial design, that basically involves these 4 different dimensions. First one is that we need to develop an awareness of the historicity of the fact that design has taken place as a result, or it was taking place in connection with that sort of Western expansionism and Western historical experience, at the levels of knowledge, being, and doing. So we have about decolonizing epistemology, decolonizing ways of being, decolonizing ways of doing as well, and practice. Second, pluralizing the histories of design beyond it's been located largely within the modern West and the Western understanding of the world, so that there are many other histories of design. When we taught, when we teach, and when we think about the history of design, now there are emerging all these other histories of design in many different parts of the world, certainly in the old world, as taken as a whole, but also in many other countries as well. The third point for me that is very important is how do we create spaces within institutions such as this one, or Carnegie Mellon, or Parsons, or what have you, or Chapel Hill, for designing, for forms of design that emerge from non-dominant ways of worlding, which can be anywhere in the world. There are ways of worlding, there are ways of designing, that are designed by other names, that do not conform to the dominant ways of thinking about life and the dominant ways of being, doing, and knowing. And finally, how do we collaborate as partners in symmetrical relations with people in the Global South trying to do design otherwise, trying to do design differently. So there's a lot of emphasis on decolonial design. There's a bunch of now special of journals and a couple of books about decolonial design that I think you will find interesting. And finally, in terms of these trends in design, the framework that I've been working on myself that I call autonomous design, which tries to bring together design and autonomy, which seem to be like an oxymoron, because autonomy is precisely about, well, in a way, it's about designing your own conditions for your community, your place, your region, your country. But somebody else is doing the designing, so there seems to be a contradiction there. But it is a field that I see at least as emerging at the intersection of these social struggles. I will mention a couple of the struggles now, the movements now in a moment, that we've been working with, and critical theory or critical design theory. So the concern with how do we move beyond development, the concern with how do we move beyond extractivism, how do we come up with different ways of thinking about life and the relation between humans and non-humans, all of that from theory or from the field of anthropology, geography, political philosophy, and design studies is what is then articulating with social struggles to produce this idea of autonomous design. Some of the basic principles of autonomous design. The first one, for me, is the most important. I'm just going to read a couple of them. I forgot to mention that I usually don't read what is there in the PowerPoint. I talk or speak around that. But this I want to read, at least the first two. That every community practices the design of itself. The development experience, for those of you who are interested in international development, has been the opposite. It assumes that communities in the global south don't have anything. They lack everything. They don't have knowledge. They don't have anything of value. They are poor. They are needy. They are all these different things. They are ignorant. They don't have even knowledge. So, but every community practices the design of itself means that all communities worldwide, even the poorest of the poor or the poorest communities in the world today, have to, by necessity, render their individual and collective existence into a discovery of the conditions under which they live, and that the idea is how do we couple that with certain tools of design to work with communities in their life projects, as they are called, for instance, in Colombia by indigenous peoples. They don't talk about development projects, but about life projects. And the second point, the other one that I'm going to emphasize, is that working with communities, especially with social movements or communities in resistance against extractivism, always demands from us that we understand deeply the political project of those communities. What are these communities about? So that we don't superimpose our own ideas and values upon on the communities themselves. And that those communities are fostering, or those movements, non-patriarchal or non-heteropatriarchal, non-liberal, post-capitalist forms of society, or what we could call convivial societies. I'm just going to jump over this. And very, very quickly, this is the region where I've been working in Colombia, about 5 more minutes. The Cauca River Valley is a region, it's a beautiful region. I can't tell you much more about it, but I can send you information, any of you who is interested. I have a long presentation on this. That has been devastated by 100 years of a very pernicious development model based on the expansion of sugarcane and extensive cattle ranching with huge ecological and social effects, mostly populated also by black and indigenous peoples and peasants. And in a way, it looks beautiful, but when you start looking closer, this is all you see is sugarcane for 400 kilometers on the Pan American Highway, and then left and right between the two mountain chains of the region. And of course, it's the site of many struggles, indigenous struggles. Let me just mention this very quickly, which is a indigenous, because it's just going on now. This is just going on now in Colombia as we speak. This uprising by indigenous peoples has been going on for several decades, but again, now and then resurfaces and now is in that phase. And they say that we are in deep trouble because Mother Earth has been enslaved, and as long as she is enslaved, so are we, everybody, humans and non-humans, and hence call for the liberation of Mother Earth as a project for everybody, not just for indigenous peoples, but for everybody. So wherever we are, we are in that we must consider seriously what is the liberation of Mother Earth, they say, these activists say, in our own communities. Same with Afro-descendant peoples in Colombia that I've been working with. I'm just going to skip over this. This is what work that we just started doing in the past year. We have just a few meetings trying to imagine a transition design imaginary a project for this region from what I described to a very different kind of situation and model. And brief conclusion. So go back to the basic point, we're all designers and we're all design. So we have to take responsibility for the worlds we create. And transition design, I like this concept that transition design can be seen as a practice of healing the web of life. It's a sketch at a time, a stitch at a time, a loop at a time. There's a musical composition going around that is called loops of healing. That I like that concept. Collaborative and interactive mending. Interactive mending is one of the concepts that has been here at the exhibit on repair and design futures. It's been worked out. And design, for me, then, can become an open invitation for us all to become mindful and effective weavers of the mesh of life. So if life is this mesh of relations, how do we contribute to reweave that mesh? And that goes also for cities. I mean, in cities it's very difficult to see it, but this is a concept that I'm actually trying to begin to apply to work in cities, in urban areas. It has a very feminist component, but a feminist component that emphasizes the communal. This comes from Latin American feminism, and I know this can be controversial here, but believe me, this is a very strong and very sophisticated group of Latin American feminists that includes some indigenous feminists and black feminists as well, when they say that we have to choose the historical project of being community. If globalization has been the historical project of breaking down community, of systematically creating individuals who no longer know how to live at peace and with respect with each other and with the earth, then we have to recommunalize our social life. And that means that the strategy from now on is feminine. That's from Rita Segato, one of the most interesting thinkers in Latin America today. So we can talk about healing and ontologies of care towards in that communal way. Thomas Berry, an American theologian and ecologist, talks about this beautiful sentence: the earth is a community of subjects, not a collection of objects. He talks about what he calls the Ecozone Era, the era of the house of life, the house of the earth, that he defines as that moment in which humans and the earth can finally coexist in a mutually enhancing way. And I think that's a very interesting way as a way of defining the goal of a transition design project. And I'm going to leave you maybe with this. I have two more slides, but maybe we can use them later on. This is from David Orr. And I like this when there's actually a Chumash, indigenous woman in California, gave it to me when we went with some people from Carnegie Mellon to do a transition design. They have been doing that for a while, and we went a few weeks ago. And she was in one of the meetings, and she passed me this little piece of paper with this. And she says that we don't need more successful people. This is the challenge of design education today. Yes, I mean, the academy today is submitting completely, is surrendering completely to the pressures of just educating and training people to be successful in globalized market in individual terms. That's fine up to a certain point. But also, where are we going to create the spaces for educating these different kinds of people, the transition designers, the weavers, as this says, the lovers, the healers, the peacemakers, the repairers of the web of life. Okay.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you. It's me, it's my work. Thank you for being here. I know we're at the end of the week. I know you just spent 6 hours in studio, so we thank you for taking the time to be with us. I am Jess Brown. I am an associate professor here at, where is it? Your school? Is this on? Okay. I'm in ID. This is my first year. I'm an alumni from here about 12 years ago, something like that. And I just came out of toy design, so I might still be a toy designer. I'm still thinking about that, though. But right now, what I'm going to talk about in this part of the discussion is kind of my slant on industrial design and what I feel like I bring to the practice and to my classroom. So while I was at Hasbro, that's where I was previously doing toy design, and a lot of my work was about bringing diversity to our toys and our packaging. So being a Black designer, one, I feel like I'm always the only one in the room, and I have to give that voice, which gets to be very heavy. And in the products I was creating, I always wanted to make sure that our products reflected the consumers, i.e. the kids and the parents, that were buying those. So I did a lot of relauncher products. This is the one I'm most proud of because I was able to add a nice, diverse cast of characters to our products. And that's me as a weeble down there. Another thing I would do, TACA was another one of our brands, and even trying to get our either licensors or the company as a whole to understand who our consumers were. So normally on our packaging, it always had been little white boys. And I said, nope, girls love to get rough and tumble. They love to get dirty as well. And so do kids of other ethnicities, cultures. So I was so proud in our marketing that we got our token Asian kid, but is also ambiguous enough that he could also be Latinx. So they felt very proud of themselves on that. These were the little things that I pushed for. I'm sorry, this is really... Arturo, how'd you do this? He didn't have food bearings, I guess. You practice? All right, hopefully that's good. So this was a little bit of the part that I could do. I couldn't change the system that I was in. I couldn't change getting more people that looked like me on teams, but I could do a little bit of this. Right before I left, I love that when we're going to get to our panel discussion about the fight between capitalism and industrial design and designing for people and how all those forces are at odds. And I felt that when I was there. I had a certain value system, and my value system just did not match up with that of our corporation and the profits that we had to deliver to our shareholders. So I took a picture of this board. This is the last picture I took before I left my floor. Downtown, and it said 65-ish million today, 100-ish million by 2022. What will it take to make that happen, and how do we do that? I didn't even know what that means. Like, that number just did not make sense in my head when I thought about all the things that were going on in the world, all the injustice, and as a social justice warrior, this just did not make sense to me. So this is why I had to leave, and this is why I'm here. That's how I was feeling all the time. And so while I was there all the time, I was the token Black person for everything. Every team came to me, can I put this kid on packaging? Is this hair okay on the baby doll? Is this skin tone okay? And that shit gets exhausting. And so I couldn't get angry because I wanted to keep my job, but I had to figure out what is an approach I was going to do. So I created the Bebo, which is the Bureau of Everyday Black Offenses. And I tried to make sure, I made it act like it was this agency from the 50s, all these people sitting in the basement. I had agents, they had badges. And when someone would submit a question, I was like, okay, do I get angry, or how do I do this through design thinking and design process? So I just made my own design project. And what I would do is someone would be like, Jess, is it okay to use this kind of straight hair on this Black baby doll and put green eyes on it? I'm like, actually, that's not what we would do. But I would say, dear so-and-so, according to the Bebo, it is not okay to do these things for this reason. And at the end of it, I would always say, and we did a really cool handshake and a cool dance, and we all consent to this thing. And so this helped me get through when I was angry. I just tried to do it in a way that was approachable to other people. And I started just making more artwork, and the artwork felt good because I was coming out of this whole design thing that was about making money, making profits, and just making a lot of it, and it wasn't sustainable. And then how do I get back to the making part? Like, what matters to me? And all my work is always about me being in places where I don't see myself, seeing cartoons, TV shows. So how do I do that? And so now I'm doing all these photo projects. You know, I think about all my work's about pop culture. So you've got Sex and the City, and it just blew me away that these ladies just never ran into Black people in New York. Like, it just blew my mind. And so, you know, I'm just re-narrating everything. So I put me there. I'm the leader of this pack right now. I grew up loving Doris Day and Rock Hudson movies. I love it. My mom's like, what are you doing, little girl? But I just love the antics of it. It's like you did not arrive as a proper woman until you had your mink. So I wanted that to look the same for me, because when I saw those images on TV, we were maids, we were domestics, but I wanted to look like this. So now I get to do that. Same thing. I thought Julie Andrews was my grandmother. That was my girl. You know, I made all my cousins act like the Von Trapp children, and they had to, you know, do the whole line. And so I'm just saying, you know what? I'm going to realize this. I've been doing it in my career. This is how I move throughout the world, but I want to see more of this. I want my niece to see more of this. I want my cousins, my students. How do we get to this place? Same thing with gender. How come I didn't see any badass ladies doing this? Why was it just about James Dean? What was the black version of that? What was the female version of that? So now I'm putting myself into that. And it's a mixture between live photos and doing Photoshop. Outside of this, my work is just about equity, social justice, inclusion, activism. So how can I create design works that speak to that? How can I use my body as art performance? How can I use visual arts as performance to fight not only for me and people who look like me, but for everyone? So I'm a part of a group by Brick by Brick, which was started by RISD alumni here, and it's co-captained by Nikki Jewin in Foundations, and we use our bodies as art performance pieces, and we use Trump's hate and misogyny as bricks on our bodies, and we go stand in protest of things. So this was at the Women's March. This was at the Kavanagh Trials. We teamed up with MoveOn.org to just talk about why we're here and why we're using our bodies in order to get that message out. So using art and design for activism. I'm working on a Wou Project right now, so I'm just pretty much bombing all bathrooms. For me, a lot of it has to deal with when I go to concerts in sports. And the women's bathroom, you miss everything because the line's so long, but the men's line's never that long. So I just started carrying these little stickers around, and I put them on the men's bathroom, and I go in. And then all the women follow me, because I'm just like, guys, you got your thing, I got my thing. We're in this stall, unless you're doing your business number 2, this is all us. So it's just about, like, once one person does it, other people will follow. So I'm just always creating spaces for myself. And so what I do in the classroom, I just took all these experiences that I've had, all that I've had in corporate, all that I've had in design projects, and this is what I'm trying to do in my classroom. So I've got a step-by-step guide on how to teach like Lady Jaye. That's when I'm out and about doing my thing. Step 1, always show up with a fresh pair of kicks. Create an environment of respect, empathy, and valuing on every perspective. The thing is I'm just always trying to meet the kids where they are, no matter what age level they are. You know what everyone loves to talk about? Sneakers. They love to talk about a fly track jacket, a haircut. So where are you so I can get to that point so then we can open up and have discussion for those difficult things. Step 2, don't flip the table. When I have a big challenge that comes your way, flip the script. Find another point of entry. The answers are always in the unexpected approach. This is what I did when I was at Hasbro, and I kept getting all these microaggressions piled on me. I couldn't get angry. I couldn't flip the table. I couldn't just walk out, but I created the Bebo. And this is the way that helped me address those issues. Step 3, build community. Find others that are trying to do things similar to you. Step out into areas that you're less familiar in. You might find out something. My goal here at RISD is for the institution of RISD to cross the river into the community, and for the community to cross the river here, or feel comfortable to in the institution. Too much do we all stay on this little strip in these little blocks. There's so much happening right outside of here. And I want us to experience that, and I want this area, this city, to know that they are welcome here and they can come in here. So all my classes are all about co-collaborating and going out into the community. Step 4, remind everyone around you that to create is to change culture. What we're doing here, just this panel here today, right now, we're working to change that culture, and that we are all citizen designers. Get the students in the field from day one, listening, learning, and relationship to others. When we were talking about design and activism, I took them over to the State House for the reproductive bill signing, or that if it was going to pass or not. I had them there. I gave them the option to just watch, or to observe, or to participate. And then they made the choice to participate if they wanted to, and it was amazing. That's it.
I'm an architectural historian, so I'm going to approach the topic slightly differently. I mean, how these questions of pluriverse or has figured in architectural history. And usually, or for the past, in the last century, the way it has figured is in the shape of participatory design. So you know, there have been schemes like this one, where you know, the idea that people, if you create certain models, poor people can build their own houses, right? So if you provide them with the opportunity, the land, and in this case, if you provide them with, this was created by two people, Charles Abrams, who was a housing activist in New York, and also a person who instituted rent control, and Otto Koenigsberger, who taught at the AA, and before that in India. And they created this model that if you provide people just with roofs as the primary thing, the first thing, you know, they can take a loan and then have the roof, they'll save at rent elsewhere, and then they can build their own houses. So it's been greatly celebrated, and there are other models too. But what each time it ends up happening is that these models, instead of creating participation, become simply a way of appropriating or becoming an alibi to creating the idea or instituting the idea that you know, people are participating. In this model, for instance, when poor are invited to build their house and work, you know, the idea is that they'll work during their free time. One question that neither Charles Abrams nor Otto Koenigsberger asked is, where is this time supposed to come from? Right, and there are very current or present iterations of this model too, that we keep on asking poor to come help join the project, but we never ask where is the time going to come from. So what this house does, and when they protested that, you know, we don't have the time to build or finish the house, the community's reply was, well, instead of protesting, you actually put the same time in building the houses, you know, you'll have your house. So what the house or these kind of participatory models do is they expand the notion of the present. They create a new idea of time in which eats up the future, right? The right to demand a political future, or right to politically demand a future, right? So it becomes now the poor's burden, no longer the expert's burden, to build the house, right? They have already been given all the ingredients, and if they fail, it's their problem. So this new model, I presented this at a talk recently at museum down south, rhymes with Roma, and I was met with you know, a lot of resistance. And they with a museum that's invested in, you know, presenting architecture as something that, you know, that can salvage, or, you know, that can you know, save the world and that can transform. I mean, there's a lot of investment recently into see architecture as a social project. So someone asked me, so you're giving up on architecture, you know, as an instrument of making social change? And given the history of, you know, self-help programs, and there are other examples like this one, which were called tropical architecture, in which you know, you create houses with, you know, elaborate grills, and it's supposed to be with local materials and local techniques, and somehow the idea that if people are feeling comfortable, they are happier, economic growth will happen. But what it did in the project, yes, that happens to a certain degree. Yes, they'll be more comfortable and the house will be cheaper to build. But this kind of model also sneaks in something else. It changes, especially in third world or developed sphere, the problem of development itself. There is no longer a problem of lack of capital, which has been stolen over, you know, hundreds of years through colonization, or now through nationalism and other schemes, World Bank restrictions, and, you know, trade asymmetries. It changes the idea or the question of development, the problem of third world development, from a question of money to simply a question of realigning things. Align native bodies to climate, align materials to the native body, and you'll have magical growth. Right? So in every case, the burden is placed on the poor, and it becomes their problem to be sitting, you know, or be present at the right place at the right time. So I said, no, there is no hope for architecture to ever, in the current model, to save the world to somehow be the instrument that we wish it to be. So they asked me, well, so that sounds pretty depressing, but do you have any model or any way of going forward? And I said, I don't have, not in architecture, but I have an analogy in a film which was recently produced and it's been celebrated. Some of you might have seen it. It's called The Minstrel Man, and it's a story of an illiterate, lower caste Hindu Indian man Muruganantham, who discovers that his wife was using, rags during her menstrual period, and he asked her, why aren't you using, sanitary pads? And she said they are too expensive. And he discovered that 70 to 80% of Indian women use just unsanitary rags, and it causes, deaths. It causes severe reproductive problems, and the reason that they know that they are sanitary pads, the reason they can't use them because they're too expensive. So Muruganantham set out, even though he was a school dropout, he had a job, he started working less, he set out to make a sanitary pad, cheaper version of sanitary pad. And first, there were so many trade secrets that he couldn't, figure out what the material was, and he started trying different materials, and he gave it to his wife, to try it on. The problem was that you could only use it once a month, right, when she was having her period. So he decided, okay, well, I need a bigger sample, size. So he approached women's medical college, the woman there. But very soon, first they refused and some of them agreed, but very soon he developed the reputation that he's a pervert, he's trying to get in, so his wife leaves him. His mother-in-law leaves him. He's like, okay, I'm not going to be defeated. What I'm going to do is he gets a football bladder, the air thing inside a football, fills it up with goat blood, which he gets from a friend who's also a school dropout now works as a butcher, and then goes to another friend who is working in some chemist lab, also a school dropout, who gives some anti-colligating agent of some sort, so the blood doesn't, colligate. What's the word? Yeah. Coagulate. Yes, there I got it. Okay, so he fills this bladder and wears it around his belt, and then puts the pad himself on him with a tube going in. And as he's walking around, he keeps pressing it to see if it's working or not. He had discovered in this way that it wasn't actually cotton that's used in pads. It's actually a specific specially processed bark, material made out of tree's bark, so it doesn't, even if you press it, it doesn't leak. So his experiment was successful, but then, people saw him, with his clothes red, and then later he's washing these things, and they thought that he's got some very serious venereal disease, and they threw him out of the village. Right, so he's ostracized. His family has left him, but he keeps at it, and he succeeds in the end, producing not only finding the material, finding the packaging, but also setting up a production process of 4 machines, which can be very simply operated and repaired, and set these plants out throughout India. To this day, he has set up 1,000 plants. He and women, who has a history of, abuse, violence against them, they come to these plants. He trains them. He says that he goes there on one-way ticket, so he never buys a return ticket because he doesn't know how long it's going to take. But he produces, and the woman gets trained, maintained, and then he lets them market the product in their own name, so they can brand it whatever. So he has not copyrighted his product. But when this was spreading, when he was like around 300-400 plants, venture capitalists from all around the world started coming him and asking him, giving him money, take this money. He has counted to this day, he has refused $32 million. And the reason he refuses that, this is important to pay, because otherwise we can see it, this is, we might interpret it as something, innovation, which is poor have, and it naturally occurs, and, you'll find, if you just let them do whatever they do, and they'll come up with these creative, no. There were 2 reasons for his success. Yes, creativity, but also that he understood the structural problems that creativity faces when expanding. So he understood that if he took that money, he'll be bound into a legal structure, right? That will be which will change the goal. It'll be more towards making profits. It will be more towards creating markets, but not the social goals and the training and distribution of money and knowledge that he wanted to achieve. So he says, I don't need any money, I need people, right? So this is the model of the Minstrel Man. I said, told, well, now you know, MoMA, that we don't have a Minstrel Man of architecture. So, and that doesn't mean there have been, celebration of poor. John Turner went to Peru, in the 60s and said, look at these, slums and what we used to call them slums at this time. At that time, that people are creative, they're making all these things, so we should just let them, architecture without architects. We should celebrate all that. But there was Grofsky, there was similar exhibitions at MoMA later on. But that idea of simply celebrating poor as creative, as is to, in fact, ignore the structural biases, the political resistance, the social biases that they face. Muruganatham's story is an exception in that sense that he was able to circumvent all those by himself, right? And it took him at a large cost. So now the question becomes, what is the role of designers in this case? The designers have to, if not create objects, but create precisely, help find an alliance with people. If this is autonomous design, as Professor Escobar said, if this is an example of that autonomous design, to help create that space of social and political possibilities, or space where creativity can happen. We don't do that. I've been thinking about this project. We simply keep dictating models from above. Gayatri Spivak has written a paper which is called Can There Be a Feminist World?, in which she argues that no matter how many laws you make against rape, there will always be a perpetrator of violence against women. What we have to create really is a will for laws, will against rape, right? And that has to happen from the ground, from below. So what we have to do is not keep on creating designs of participation of this and that, but a will for design. And to create a will for design like that, we have to create also the, take out or destroy or demolish the structural political biases and hindrances that occur in its way. Thank you.
Fabulous. So my name is Ramon Tejada, and I'm actually using my phone to read my notes. So I'm gonna just do a few things. So I teach in graphic design here, and before I get started, I wanted to say that I want to acknowledge the Native people whose lands we are standing on, and the many ancestors that have made it possible for me personally to stand here. I think that's something that's very important that we do. We are literally on top of Native land at this school, so that's not kind of as a joke or anything. So really briefly, I'm gonna give you a little bit of history about myself. So I'm gonna let you read this quote that I wrote. I have stopped reading it out loud because it's like, but. So just a little bit of history. I was born in the Dominican Republic, which is the land where that Christopher Columbus guy landed. So we were colonized. So I have colonization all over me. So this is the clearest way that I've been able to articulate sort of my position as a designer, and in my case, as a graphic designer on this planet. And I wrote this for the Walker Art Center last summer. I didn't really realize that I was writing this until after it got published, and then my friends started sending this to me. So one of the things that I'm sort of thinking about is my relationship as a designer and then as a teacher, and how those two things merge, and thinking about how design, history, and theory rarely has addressed issues of questions of race, gender, class, coloniality. Design likes to be quote unquote political. We love to be political about specific things, not about everything. We are very picky about what we're political about. And design so far, at least what I have studied, and I've spent a lot of money on, like some of you, has been so far a very Eurocentric affair. So I almost changed my name to Johann, because I spent many years pretending to be Swiss or German, because that's what graphic designers are, Swiss or German. Who cares about you come from Latin America, right? So this is just a little bit of things from where I am. You know, Dominican Republic, island, merengue, baseball. I did not get the baseball gene, FYI. So I'm gonna skip through some. So one of the things that I've been doing is this idea of puncturing, which I've now slashed to decolonizing / expansion, which equals visibility. And it's literally thinking about combining both the practice and the teaching, this coming out of this restless sense of the fact that I never saw myself in any of the work, in any of the classes that I ever took. There were no textbooks that ever showed me in the context of design. There were no histories. I never heard anybody's name that sounded like mine or anybody else other than, like, you know, Joseph Müller-Brockmann, the Bauhaus, celebrating the 100th year with their 1000th book, who cares? 2 weeks ago, right? Like, and we're still talking about it. So, like, it's just like, this is the good thing, this is the correct thing, it just comes out of one place. The rest of you, we don't know where you're coming from. So design sort of traffics in this, and I'm sort of thinking about the audacity of design of excluding so many people. That thing that we call design, and that's something we were talking about before. This thing we call, quote unquote, design, all capital, R-I-S-D, that D, right? We call it design. What is that supposed to be, right? And I'm reading from my phone. This is the first time I've ever done it this way, so everybody knows. So some questions I keep on asking, and I have lots of questions about this. So this is not at all an inclusive list. One of them, this was sent last year by, I don't know exactly who is an academic, right around August when we were writing syllabuses, faculty. How is your syllabus actively disrupting white supremacy, cis-hetero ableist patriarchy? As educators, we must design for justice and liberation. This made the rounds on Twitter, and I was like, ooh, oh God, right? Lists, who are we showing, right? Who are we talking about? So as designers and teachers, are we just perpetuating the same system we criticize when we march by continuing to manifest, glorify, sanctify, canonize these design narratives, structures, systems, and pedagogy? So like we go march for the Women's March on Black Lives Matters, and then Monday we go teach modernism or that thing. So what are we doing? So this became a personal problem for me after the elections in particular. Like, I can't do that. How do I enable students to see themselves, their values reflected in their work, especially students of color? This is huge for us because we have been told for so many years that we're sort of lesser than, you're not good enough. Design has been really good at telling people that look like me that we're just not talented enough, that we're not good enough, that our work is just not professional enough, it's not rigorous enough. It's something else. But, you know, it's just not white enough, I guess. That's what I'm, you know. So a lot of this is about thinking about this, right? So I've been thinking about, like, how do I enable students to see themselves? Like, how do I do that? One of the things I do is, like, thinking about how a lot of this is very, very messy and sort of loving being in that space. So how am I attempting to do this? One of this is the Decolonize Your Bookshelf, which is this t-shirt sold by this Decolonize Collective in New York. Most of my books are in a storage unit in Philadelphia out of U-Haul. I don't need to look at those books anymore, right? Like, they're great. I bought a lot of books. So decolonizing your bookshelf, make space for other people. Get off the stage, stop talking so much. You've hugged too much space, so who do we need to talk to that we haven't? And I'm being confrontational about this on purpose, by the way. I love it. Whom do I show as examples? What themes do I present? What languages do I use? Do I need to sit there and present the same 35 examples that every other faculty member is presenting? No. No, I'm done with that. Like, let somebody else carry that trope. Like, I'm not doing it anymore. Like, I decided, this was a decision I made. I stopped that modernist train, and graphic design traffics so heavily in that ism of modernism. Like, it's so embedded. And it's very difficult to ask these questions of yourself because that means that you're challenging your own education. So this is hard to do. This is unlearning, which, as Bell Hooks says, is incredibly difficult to do, especially after certain ages. So one of the ways I did this was, I taught a class this last fall called the Decolonizing Design, which was the most difficult class I've ever taught. Some of those students are here, I think. Aisha is over there. And what I did was I came up with a reader, and I literally just went online and I spent the whole summer digging through pieces of writing that had anything to do with this, and I just put them on there. It's a Google Doc, it's open source. Some of the students added stuff to it. I have friends from all over the place added to it. There's people that I don't even know that have gone in here and added things. So it's just a list of things organized in the way I sort of found things, not in any sort of organizational manner. What I was trying to get at is, who do I engage with? I wanted to engage with James Baldwin in the context of design, because we don't talk about James Baldwin in design. We talk about James Baldwin as like this literary figure, right? I wanted to engage with Bell Hooks, who I never encounter in the context of design. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who's incredibly influential right now. She's going to be here for graduation. Ha! Oh my God, right? John Leguizamo up there. Arturo, your book is there. When I got it, I was like, oh my God, just like everybody else has said, he wrote this book. I could not write that book, but I'm glad you wrote it. And I love pop art as well as Jess does, thinking about, in particular, Janelle Monáe, Beyonce, Solange, 3 African-American women who are literally doing this thing in music, but in design, we're still over here talking about the 100th anniversary of the Bauhaus. Like, literally, let's move on, y'all. Like, seriously. So I'm going to show you really quickly an assignment that I gave that class. And one of the things is I was trying to figure out how do I short circuit our brains from literally going to the same well that we always go to. And like, oh my God, like I know what I do well, so let me go there. So I wanted to short circuit. So I have an MFA in performance art before I had an MFA in graphic design. So I went back to dance and gesture and movement and started to think about some of those practitioners, Trisha Brown, Fela Kuti, who just amazing, Taraj Harrell, who's in New York doing work, and trying to think about whether another process from somewhere else that was very foreign to designers could actually help. And this is to graphic designers. Most of us are used to this little laptop situation. So this is our gesture right here, all day long, right? So this was hard for some of them. So I asked them to generate 3 unique physical gestures that express this idea, their individual definition of what decolonizing meant, and experiment with these individual gestures. What I was getting at was really thinking about sort of like, again, how to short circuit yourself. So conversations of like, we never really use our bodies. I never even thought about that. One of the students says, so I'm like, so if you don't use your body, why are you designing for humans? There's a connection there. So if you don't know, if you can never use your body, you never thought about it, what the heck are we doing? Who are we designing for, right? So here's some outcomes. So this is Bobby Joe, who's a grad student in graphic design, and he did this amazing video, and this is just sort of test shots, and he started taking dance classes at Brown after this, and started to think about like, oh, gesture and movement. He ended up, this was the final project. The final project for the class was make the project you've always wanted to make because we need it right now. That was the project, the final project. And he made this whole thing. There's a sensor that he has right here. That sensor gets activated depending on how far or near you are near him. And it's all about a discussion about sort of the relationship he has to people feeling comfortable or not getting near him because he's a black man, right? So this whole thing gets activated. We realized in class, oh my God, the activation happens when you give him a hug, actually. You don't ever see it. The second project is Aisha, who's over there sitting down in industrial design. So Aisha was really interested in this idea of sort of like the classroom as a microcosm of like our world, and how there's certain structures that we use in the classroom, how we sit, where we sit, whether we know people's names, we know the faculty's name, but we don't know other people's names, and how that sort of creates other problems. So she created this sort of classroom care kit, and all these tests that we did, looking at the maps of the classrooms. So it was pretty exciting to go through and think about like, what do we do in our classrooms and how do we set them up? And I'm like gonna go over here, and then I've left my notes. So one of the ideas is puncturing facilitates openings for the excluded to emerge and sit at the table. New and expanded critical voices. And thinking, I will leave you with Rihanna saying, whose voice are you elevating? Because a lot of this comes to whose voice are we elevating, who are we putting on the platform, or who are we maintaining up there? Who do we need to like send on a vacation for a little bit? Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for all the presentations. My name is Sophie. I'm a 4th year architecture student at RISD. And I guess I was just wondering how you all place the boundaries of your own design, and if it's important to kind of come up with a communal definition of design to push everyone who's in this room and interested in this, and then everyone who's not in this room and not interested in this, to come to the table and say, we're all designers, this is what's important, or finding agency within your own specific practices or kind of types of design, and kind of furthering whatever you're working on through the specificity, and finding that kind of as a liberating kind of definition of your practice.
Is it okay to collect a few? Sure. Yeah.
Hi, I also wanted to thank you all, and hi, I'm Jack. I'm a freshman going into architecture. So Mr. Escobar spoke a lot about the idea of mending existing systems in his section of the talk, and I was wondering if you think like the entire system of designer is even mendable, or if the entire system of designer versus non-designer is something to even spend more time on, or if it's going to completely collapse as a system.
Hello, my name is Andrew Wang. I'm also a freshman student here at RISD, and I wanted to thank you for your wonderful presentations again. My question was focused on this quote that I found to be very interesting, which was from Arturo's presentation, where he quoted Manzini saying, "In a world in which in a world of rapid and profound transformation, we are all designers." And I just wanted to ask all of you in that if we are all now implicated as designers in this new system, what tools do you think that we have at our disposal that would help us become, quote, designers? And what form would they take in a way that would still maintain the best practice of healing and the best practices of sustainability? Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe tackle those three very wonderful, very large questions. Arturo, may I ask you to respond first, being our guest?
Okay. I didn't get the first question, the first part of your first question, but rather than ask you to repeat it, I'm just going to let my colleagues answer that question. Something about the boundaries between design or something else, or not?
Within design.
Oh, within design. Okay, let me think about it. Well, one of the things that maybe is related to where design is mendable. Actually, the three questions are connected. The third question is about we're all designers. What does that mean? What are the tools if we're all designers? And one of the things that I usually say when I give this talk, because when I give a talk like this, the audience is usually non-design people. I give it for anthropologists, for geographers, for environmentalists, for philosophers even. And they don't know much about design other than the stereotypes about design. People design chairs, tables, fancy rooms, architecture, fashion design, graphic design, and so forth. So sometimes I say, do not get mystified by the concept of design. In a way, design is everything we do. So whatever we say that we were applying to critical design or to design practice, we can apply to everything we do in our everyday lives. In a sense, because everything is to be redesigned. In a way, because almost nothing is really working the way it should be working. I know that's a very strong statement. I know that sounds very negative and very dark and so forth. But sometimes, I remember this Afro-Colombian activist who told me about a year ago, says, well, there is so little of these sort of conventional walls, institutions, academy, et cetera, that is useful to us for the kinds of things we want to do. So in a way, and if we look, anywhere we look, we are connected to one or another form of oppression, one or another form of ecological devastation. So everything is up to be redone and rebuilt and repaired and rethought and reinvented. So that's the concept of we are all designers as well. I sort of like Manzini's distinction between expert design and diffuse design. The diffuse design is the design that everybody has because of the fact that we're living humans. And even non-humans have a diffuse design sense. And because we all do, we're all makers. We cannot but make things. So in that sense, but I think we have to get the distinction between what a professional design practice is and a non-professional design practice, but take away the asymmetry, which is the asymmetry between sort of the architects coming with a degree to design for the poor. So let's get rid of that asymmetry. Let's get rid of that difference that we know and they don't, because they know much better. I mean, talking about cities, the recent books by, I'm sure you know this, by Abdul Malik Simon on cities, which is amazing ethnographies of cities in slums, mostly in Southeast Asia and West Africa. They show the incredible resourcefulness and ability of poor people to make do with what they have, makeshift lives. So in a way, that boundary, we have to keep shifting that boundary, problematizing that boundary in ways that I think the other speakers also mentioned. So the question of, is design mendable? In a way, decolonizing design is about mending design. It's about repairing design itself. It's about making design more responsive to the needs of humans and non-humans today in the world. It's about making designs much more explicitly political. It's about maybe beginning to articulate within design what seems to be unarticulable, especially in the US. And I'm glad that Jess started with that, the connection between design and capitalism. The toy industry is about capitalism. I mean, toys are Us, and we are capitalists, and we create capitalist toys. So how do we, and I'm taking too long, so I'll end with this. How do we articulate effectively a critique of capitalism in the US? I mean, it seems to be so impossible. Sometimes I say in Latin America, that's the starting point. I mean, we take for granted that any alternative is going to be, if not anti-capitalist, at least post-capitalist. The critique of capitalism is always there. In the US, it seems to be impossible because you're immediately labeled, you know, leftist, radical left, communist, socialist, etc. Maybe the Green New Deal is giving us a chance to begin to push towards a more explicit, clear articulation of the ravages of capitalism in our lives and the need to reconstitute sociality and to rearrange the social in a different way.
I mean, I think the idea of taking ownership and license of what you want to do in terms of like as a designer, but I've also been thinking about it as like a lot of what we do, I think it might be off. There we go. Is that better? No?
Hello.
Okay, there we go. So I think I've been thinking recently like the design that we do is capital D, is all capital D design, instead of a lot of what a lot of us are talking about and what a lot of you students are interested in doing is this lowercase design that's really about human beings. And I think that design is supposed to be for human beings, but somehow I think we got lost along the way. And we're trying to find our way back to sort of dealing with people, not in the sense that we go and save them, which you address really beautifully, like this idea that like we know everything. I mean, this is like one of those, like I've been reading Bell Hooks, and one of the things she talks about is like, we don't know anything. Nobody cares where you went to school. Nobody cares how many degrees you have if you cannot be a human being to somebody else. It's irrelevant that you went to X, Y, and Z school if you cannot have a conversation with somebody where you're talking above them, at them. So I think a lot of what we've done in design is to talk at people and to say this is what's valuable. I think we need to get back to like, okay, let's talk with each other and let's collaborate, the aspect of collaboration, the letting go of the ego. So I think that making that decision, at least for me personally, that I needed to sort of reshift and rethink and redefine what I was talking about as a designer and what I value, and in relation to what I'm teaching students and how I try to get them to make that decision earlier than waiting till you're 42 or 43 to realize that all the work that you have in your portfolio you don't really value because it doesn't show you or any of your values. It shows somebody else's values. So making that decision, I think, is really important.
No, I love the notion of, is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. What Professor Escobar said, the diffuse design and expert design, it sort of, to me, it seems, speaks to the notion of short term and the long term, and we have been focusing all our design efforts, especially the objects we design, the classes, the way we assign, make assignments, or what kind of training we're trying to give our students, they're all usually focused on the idea of fixing something short term, right? I mean, let's make a house that poor can solve themselves without looking at the overall long term situations, inequalities in global capitalism to whatnot, right? That have produced that situation. So we leave that sphere for someone else or for no one else, and we just keep on designing the short term. So I think the design has to change its focus, right? And to realize that that someone has to talk to it. There has to be occasions that we have to at some point talk about the long term, right? So one way to do that is to start pointing out the limits of our design. That yes, we're gonna do some people are dying. We have to provide them with clean water. We have to provide them we have to create filters for for clean water in villages and set up weaving workshops for widows of war, all sorts of things. I mean, they were extremely important, right? But then we have to acknowledge somehow, make apparent the limits of these things, that these things are going to reach only so many people, right? So that beyond that, something else needs to be changed, right? One example that I also gave at the same museum was of this very celebrated project recently won lots of awards, an architecture project of a school in Bangladesh that was built with compact mud. And everyone was like, this is perfect, right? And there people are making this new technology of compact mud. People can make their schools, institutions, whatever themselves. And there were photographs of smiling children in front of the school. But if you look at just Google that village, you realize that that village constructs of poor and then poor of the poor. The tribals who've been excluded when those people, the poor who came and made that village, they took land away from someone else. And those tribals had been displaced, right? And there was a line in the museum catalog that some of the school was made with mud, and then there was a lot of bamboo structure on top. That bamboo structure is disappearing. We have to convince the community that don't steal your own school and all that kind of stuff. What they didn't realize that the people that they took the land away from, and the people who couldn't send their the poor of the poor who couldn't send their children to these schools were the ones stealing the bamboo. So I asked the museum curators that let the architects go make the same school. It's fine, right? Do the same exhibitions, but have your 10 drawings. But in the 11th drawing, show the limit of what you have done. Show that school 10 years from now when all bamboo has been stolen, right? So you recognize the limit of someone who cannot participate. Recognize the existence of someone who cannot participate in our designs. Right? To create the space for someone else to start thinking of that long-term problem of land reform, right? So I think this is a purview of design, right? We just don't think of it in that way, and we don't think of how we can represent the limits of our own very well-meaning projects. We think that they are universal and they have no limits, and I think that's the biggest danger through which design does violence.
For me, and this I'm going to really focus on you right now, Sophie, I think it was. When I think of design as a profession and as a practitioner, it's about who's designed for, who are we designing for, and what is the point. And all the time when I'm designing, I just couldn't design another toaster. Like I just couldn't do it. Like we don't need any more toasters. And when I was working in toy design, one of my mentors told a really amazing story. She was on the Imagineering. It was like our version of Imagineering, like Disney has. And she was saying how our job is to create profits, right? We're supposed to go into new markets. We're always supposed to go into emerging markets and design for them based off of their wants and needs and what their likes are. So we'd done North America. We've gotten into South America, China. That's our big. We got that one. We're going in there. And then we were like, who haven't we hit? Because we already know we have Europe. And we said Africa. Africa is untapped. So how do we bring our My Little Ponies to Africa? Because they need that. And of course, we're sitting back here, we're like, Africa doesn't need My Little Ponies. You're like, they're about to be exploited next soon. Let's leave them alone. And so the company's like, nope, let's go into Africa. Let's do a study. Let's see how they play with toys. How will they receive our toys? So the team goes down to Africa. They pick a country. And the whole thing's that. So first she had to explain that, like, not a country. Whole continent, very large. And they had gone to Kenya, and they were hanging out in the village, and they were just doing these studies, and they were like, how are they gonna play with transformers? How do we get them to play with those transformers and talk to them in a way that works for them? And she was like, after a while, we just sat back. And the results, she was like, we saw them playing with recycled cans. They were playing with bottles. They would make dolls with a Coca-Cola bottle. They would get some twine and tweed and put the hair there and have a blast. And she was like, when I came back for our big presentation, she was like, the results were, we don't need to be there. And for her, that was huge to say. And she's like, I could have been fired when I said that sentence because that's not the results they wanted. But she was like, they don't need any more ponies. They don't need any more transformers. Like, we've given them enough crap that they're already trying to make toys and products out of that crap that's there. But they also have beautiful land and beautiful resources. And they've gotten along quite well without us being there. And in doing that, one, it's saying, throwing up the mirror and saying, we need to look at ourselves and what is our purpose. But also she was able to create a relationship with the women in that village. And she saw how well they were, what kind of makers they were, and the sewings they would do. So then we co-collaborated. And they made these beautiful stuffed animals using their indigenous patterns on our products, where then we employed them. We took the product and we would sell them here. And so it was a really good idea of like that whole idea of taking it and flipping the model around. It didn't last long because we couldn't sell enough. So even though it was a great idea, it didn't bring in those millions that we wanted to. But I loved how she just tried to flip that model of what toy design was.
But you're also just, it's one of the question, the idea of like other people need your stuff, like South America needs a Swiss structure to communicate. I don't know how we never realized this years ago. Like, people all over the world have been making things, communicating way before any of these structures that we hold so dear to our hearts in our educations because we spend so much money. Like, my parents don't speak English. My parents could care less about my swank little poster that I made with my cool typeface I bought yesterday. My parents don't care. Now, I had to figure out how I make work that makes my parents care for what I do because I love it. So I had to rethink that. So like me being able to make some cool gridded thing that my parents are like, oh, it's cool, all right, next. Like, it doesn't talk to them, so figuring that out. But we don't need to colonize people all over again, which is what I think we have sort of gotten to the point of, we just constantly colonize over and play this cycle of colonization on people that have been colonized over and over and over again. And we're like, oh, we're saving you. No, you're not. You're just colonizing me all over again.
So one of your questions was, do we show our own work in class? Did you say that? How much of our balance of our work do we show? And for me, I'm basing my classes off the work that I'm teaching because I didn't see myself when I was in school. So I try to take the best points of the teachers that I did have, but really saying, you're gonna learn that. I already know you're gonna learn that in another class, but what can I show you that's different? Or how can I help you learn about yourself? Because no one told me about myself when I was in art school. I got to get that outside of school from my family. That's where I got my education, my family, my church, my community. But here I try to tell my students, okay, if you are Chinese, let's learn about Chinese designers. You've had a civilization far before us that was so rich. Let's dig into that. Let's read some text from that. You're from Bogota? Let's bring that. I want to see what that brings to the world of industrial design. I don't need to teach you another thing that's Scandinavian. We got that covered. My BFA was in furniture design, and I love mid-century. I love mid-century modern. I love it. But I looked at it, and I was like, what am I doing? There's nothing in here that speaks to me at all, but whenever you're able to take what's unique about you and then put those into the furniture or product, it's also you're more interested in it because you're learning about yourself, and then it speaks to people too. And I feel like you start to reach a broader audience and do have these dialogues.
And it's also like, like I started thinking it's not about a complete rejection of everything, but it's about being inclusive
And it's acceptance of other things.
broadening the narrative, right? Like, so there's this other stuff that's there. We can coexist, but what I mean, at least personally, I have a problem with is this elevation of one value, which design has been so good at doing. Like, just, we're gonna elevate this group of people, and that's it. And everybody else you just make, we don't know what you make, but we can come up and save you because you don't know anything. So I think that's where, like, we can all coexist and actually learn, but I actually think, like Matisse said, we have a lot more to learn from other people than like other people have to learn from us. And he was referencing the Northern European world when he made that comment.
Arturo, Ijlal, would you like to add to the discussion?
I hear you completely, and I'm very excited about that project, but where I myself run into trying to do that in my classes, and I sort of run into perhaps my own limitation that it's looking at other cultures, I mean, and learning from other people, there's a tendency to exoticize them very quickly, right? And to flatten it, right? So then there is the whole point of learning gets defeated because you're again not talking about Botswana, you're talking about Africa, right? And so it's like all of a sudden becomes this big thing.
Yeah.
So the challenge is learn about other people, talk about, but how do we teach also our students to pay attention? Just like there are so many fonts in Bauhaus and whatnot, right? The slight differentiations and attenuations of one person to the next, and there are all that differences in whatever we are looking at, from class difference to gender difference to political difference. So how do we learn, empathize, but at the same time maintain the complexity that we give ourselves, give our own histories, right? So that's the challenge. So how do you build that dialogue? And it's an open question. I mean, if you guys
Arturo, would you like to?
answers to that,
Yeah.
you have learned or something or Professor?
Something very quick. I think this, what you're talking about is all these vast territories and domains of other designs that are to be discovered beyond the official canonical traditions of what has been considered design. Even within the West itself, I mean, within what we could call non-dominant Wests or non-dominant modernities, those histories within the West that have been suppressed by a particular sort of instrumentalizing patriarchal form of Western capitalism and so forth. In Latin America, some of the concepts that design people are using to name those other realities are things like designs from the South, of the South, from the South, or from the Souths, because there are multiple Souths, not just one South, altered design, other designs, or other designs and designing otherwise, so not just other designs, but also other ways of designing. Designs by other names. Many things and practices that exist in the popular experience in particular that could be construed as design with a greater or lesser degree of explicitness, even construed as design by the practitioners themselves. Even things that could not be translated into Western languages of design. There is this great dissertation, PhD dissertation in transition design at Carnegie Mellon that was just defended. I was one of the committee members, and by Ahmed Ansari. And he writes about, he develops what he calls a let me see if I can remember now, sort of a cosmological perspectivism approach to design. That how the different cosmologies, for instance, Hindu cosmology, or Islamic cosmologies, or Arabic or indigenous cosmologies, inform necessarily the kinds of designs that people have done throughout history and continue to do so, that do not reflect, or at least not completely, this modern Western history of design, and that we have to be able to learn again to see and to recognize and learn from as well.
More reactions, questions, responses to Ijlal's challenge from the audience? Okay, wonderful. So maybe we'll take two. Is that okay? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jeff Warren. I work at a nonprofit called Public Lab. And so I was reading Sandra Harding, and she writes about like the toxicity and patriarchy in the sciences, and you know, debunks it and unravels it and deconstructs it. But she was writing a lot of that in the late 80s. And when you look at how little has changed since then, it's pretty depressing. I mean, yeah, exactly. We're talking about systemic issues here, and also really big institutions. And yet some of them are not that old, right? I mean, science is a little older, but maybe like patents are younger than that, and like maybe, I don't know, film is younger than that, maybe Silicon Valley is younger than that, maybe Uber is younger than that. So like, institutions that are going to carry us forward, I'm curious about which kinds of institutions you recognize or see in the world that offer alternatives. They don't even have to be new, you know.
My question is more on the practice of design as a future designer, future architect, but designer in the broader sense, on how to try to apply approaches of transition designs. And there was one example that was very very relatable to me, the experience with the toys in Kenya, and how the idea was very wonderful, but it actually didn't work as a product, and people didn't buy it. And I think there's maybe a problem of like feasibility of like a lot of like sustainable and like new approaches, because poor people or poor countries of the South have like issues of like trying to get out of poverty, and that necessitates sometimes using strategies of capitalism. And so how do you reconcile trying to be sustainable, thinking about the long term, but also thinking about this resolving like short-term issues, getting out of poverty, for example, because a lot of times the sustainable approaches are not very profitable, pragmatically.
Two great questions.
Yeah, maybe let me answer the second one, and if there is time, maybe I'll say something about the first one as well after the round goes through. Yeah, the short term versus the long term, and oftentimes we stay with the short term, and that's the problem. And the short term, we assume that the most efficient solution is the solution provided by very mainstream notions of technology, technological fixes, by the World Bank, by the IMF, by standard development institutions. And oftentimes they might be more helpful in the short term, but in the medium term, they are more disabling and more disarticulating and more disempowering and more destructive. So sometimes I think about our strategies, for instance. This is kind of an easy way to think about it for me in three different levels. In the context of development in particular, development interventions. This was actually in response to an interview in Barcelona when they asked me, well, what do you think about development cooperation? Cooperation for development purposes is still big in Europe. And I sort of thought about these three different levels. The first level is cooperation as development assistance or development aid. This is what the World Bank does, and USAID, and most very traditional development institutions. And I said, these might lead to improvement for some people in a restricted way in the short term. But to these, I think we should say, no, we don't want any more of this. But because they reproduce coloniality, they reproduce the same inequalities and asymmetrical, and they create more, capitalism that is not going to solve the problems of capitalism and so forth. Level 2 is cooperation and social justice, or development cooperation and social justice. These are the model of, for instance, the NGOs like Oxfam Oxfam is a very interesting, progressive development organization, an NGO that focuses on human rights and gender rights and poverty alleviation and sustainability and so forth. And I think we can work with those. We can work with those and nurture those as well, but try to move along the lines of the third domain or the third level, that is a more radical, transformative domain of radical transformative alternatives, that is basically cooperation as or for civilizational transitions. And once we shift into that, then even the division between the global north and the global south begins to dissolve, because civilizational transitions is for everybody. I mean, we're all in this together. We have one planet that we share, and we all should be embarking upon this task of civilizational transitions from where we are. This is not just for indigenous people, it's not just for people from the south, it's people from everywhere. It's middle-class peoples, urban peoples, white peoples, black peoples. Everybody has to come to terms with the fact through a heightened reflexivity that we need to develop. And the designers are in a really good position to help, citizens, communities to develop a heightened reflexivity about how the worlds in which we live are not only designed, profoundly designed by capitalism, etc., but they're also designing forces themselves. They keep on designing us in particular ways that will never really contribute to sustainability and to reducing. The other thing that I usually say is try reversals. Reversals make people think. Sometimes I say the main problem in the world is not extreme poverty, but extreme wealth. I mean, redistribute the 1% and the world will be a much different place. Well, anyways, I could go on with many other reverses, but I'll just leave it at that.
I don't have an answer for I can't think of an example, but I think this conversation about decolonization is sort of like a big sort of conversation in graphic design, and I've been talking too much recently about it, but by that I mean like outside of RISD. But I think what's really interesting is to sit on panels with a bunch of people of color, which in the relation of graphic design, that hasn't happened. Graphic design conferences have been literally like a slew of famous white men, and then the rest of us taking little cute notes, like, oh my God, they showed that poster. And I think this idea of like having this conversation is who is having this conversation. Actually, who is leading the conversation, I think is different, which makes me feel really good about it. Because now I see, oh, we're not just getting regurgitations of the last 30 years. Like graphic design had 30 years ago had a crazy moment of realizing that 93% of graphic design was white. They wrote about it, they had a big conference in New York, they all literally like, expiated themselves, oh, we can learn. And 20 years later, the numbers have not changed at all. And you never saw anybody in any conference. So I think the people who are talking about this, to me, feels really incredible because they are different people, they look different, they sound different, and they're coming with different ideas. So that, for me, gives me hope. I don't know examples of who's doing this yet, but maybe,
I mean, I also think about, we always talk about institutions out there, and we are part of an institution. And so thinking about everyday ethics is really important to me, because it's, you can transform institutions from within, as several of my colleagues are doing, but also thinking about in your everyday environments, who do you listen to, whose words do you remember, who do you give space to. And so it is also about not continuously putting who's going to carry us forward, what institution is going to take us out. And I completely agree with I completely think about your question as well, but also think about how as an institution, can we do better? And so, again, not placing it outside ourselves continuously, I think is also an important moment.
To that point, the point over here, it's about making space. It's what you're saying about making space and changing things. And I think about, like I said in my class, I think about it as a co-collaboration and co-design. Like I don't know everything. I've got life experience, I've got world experience, I've got the books, I've got professional experience, but we're all bringing something to the table. And I try to just make all these moments learning moments. So it could be a topic that happened, it could be a product that we put on the table, and we just sit and we chew on it and we talk about it in a way that hasn't happened before. So recently there was an incident that I had that, I'm trying to think, what's today? All the days are blurring together. Thank you. But it was, has to do with like my work and commentary, and I do a lot of work that's very uncomfortable, but I try to do it in a way that it doesn't push people off, but welcomes them in to have a dialogue. Because whenever you accuse someone of something, their defenses go down automatically, and that's like, because we can't, that's what's the problem is, no, we're not meeting. But so in our class, we just take all those things and we say, okay, let's talk about white privilege. And like that's me talking to a class of 12 students that don't look like me, so I have to figure out how to do it in a way that is not accusatory, but so that you recognize that and talk about fragility. And we do that, and we create new vocabulary around things. So if you say privilege, like, I love the students be like, but I don't understand because like I don't have a lot of money either, so how am I privileged? Because you just hear all these buzzwords. So then as a class, we just redefine what that means in terms that works for us. And my hope is for them, recognize what you look like and the privilege that you bring or the skills that you bring, because before you go out as citizen designers into a poor community, a female community, a Latinx, a Black community. Like you can't just go in and try to be a savior and say, well, I learned all these skills at school and we're gonna do these things in your neighborhood. No, you've gotta understand the background of that neighborhood, of those people, of those communities, of the issues they have, whether it's class, gender, poverty, all those things. Like you really have to understand them. You can talk about what your idea for the project is, but listen. It's really about listening. What do they need, and how can you then use your skills and your degrees and those expert things as a co-collaborator and co-designer, and then let that community do the work, and you stand by as an observer. So not going in like I feel like what's happened before as a profession, but sitting back.
I think that that's a fundamental shift for a lot of us who teach too. I think that it's a radical shift actually from the model of we're the experts, we know everything, to oh, actually I don't, because some of you know stuff that I don't know and I want to know that. So this some of us were, I was in school and I just drilled the memorization and the regurgitation, I just have to produce regurgitations. And I think that has changed, and I think a lot of us, at least I can speak for a lot of some of my colleagues here, we're super interested in that. We're just not interested in that, I'm the expert and I'm gonna teach you everything. We're just not. I think that might be sort of a shift that we're experiencing right now in education, which I think is gonna help us get past this sort of clock that we got to.
And nor do I need the shiny thing. The level of anxiety of students trying to deliver the perfect shiny thing, I don't want that. I don't want that. I want the messy thing that got you there, and the process and the discovery, and you making a mistake and going back, and then going forward, and then going back, and then asking other people, and then bringing someone else into the work, and then it gets better and better and better the more people you bring into that. So it's just really changing the paradigm of how we've done things. And I feel like if we do that as this institution, that's how you change it from the inside out. And then we're also unleashing all these, so I don't want to say soldiers because that feels very aggressive, but warriors, something, disciples, something. Seeds, there we go.
Yes, that's good.
No, I was going to say that what you're talking about is really amazing examples of a very different kind of design praxis or design practice. And if you look at the transition design framework of the Carnegie Mellon, being developed by Carnegie Mellon, one of it has it's structured around 4 principles: new visions for design, theories of change, a new mindset for designers. And that is precisely what we're talking about. What is this new mindset for designers that will have to be created? Much more open-ended mindset that is, to some extent, has to do with decolonization of design frameworks, But it really doesn't, we don't even have to attach that label to it, but more open and more keen in observing the kinds of knowledges and experiences that many other people have in the world, and just take it from there, not take it from the usual places from which we take our designs in the business as usual mode.
No, I really love the idea of thinking the long term and the medium term, or short term and the medium term, what do you think is beneficial in, whereas it's not recognizing, it's also recognizing that, what we count as knowledge is, might be knowledge, but it has, it's effectual in the short term. And there might be other sets of knowledges which are effectual in the medium term or the long term, right? And we have a very small framework to understand other forms of knowledge which don't speak towards increasing productivity and increasing efficiency. Or in fact, I'm reminded of, as I was listening of story of my grandmother who has passed, long passed. When I was a teenager, I was, before coming here, something was going on the news and they were showing that, man has landed on the moon, it's been so many years. And the first thing she did was like, Nauzubillah, that can never happen. Satan be banned, and this is like the talk of Satan. And this is like, I was like, what? The conspiracy theory, has reached Pakistan too? Oh my God, okay. But it took me many years to realize, in conversation with friends here, that what she was doing, her reluctance or her denial that man has landed on moon was an ethical position. That we can't. It's not our place to take over the universe and just keep on designing at that scale, right? That there are no boundaries to our design. It has to be, there has to be a certain humility in what we do and recognize the limits of our knowledge, right? And that we don't teach. That we have nothing in the curriculum which says that perhaps we shouldn't go to moon again. It's enough.
So I'm afraid you want the last word, Arturo. Please. No, please go ahead.
I have a question. Actually. You can have the last word on that.
I want to say that to myself as a female on the stage right here. Okay. Big for myself. So the point of just because we can go to the moon doesn't mean we have to. And I think of design and solutions and systems as like a Netflix series. Sometimes 6 episodes is enough. Like, I don't need 18 seasons of a show like Grey's Anatomy and I don't know where it went, right? So like sometimes just like try it out, give me a taste. It could be good or bad or go long term, either one.
And I'm curious, and this might be a slightly heavier question. What's your take? This is not a very articulate way to ask the question, but what do you think about translation? What should we translate? There's this translation. We translate everything to make it accessible to our students. Languages, things written in other design, in other languages, in other cultures, in other political situations. Or should we not do that and ask and do the work ourselves? Learn instead of having translations. Learn to translate.
The first thing that comes to mind is, the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o, very well-known writer. He used to write in English, and at a certain point in his life, he decided to write only in his language. I can't remember Kikuyu, and I don't remember exactly Swahili. And precisely because a language is a cosmology, a language is an ontology, a language is a different way of being, a different way of thinking. So, but the question of translation for me has always been a different one, which is that I'm always struck by how little is translated from other languages into English. Maybe a little bit from French, maybe a little bit from German, and that's about it. It's so bad that I decided, for the past, 10 years, even this book came out in Spanish first than in English, like a year before, although I wrote most of it in English. But the last couple of books that I've written have come out in Spanish, and I was telling my editor at Duke University Press, because she asked me, well, what are you working on? I said, well, I just published this book in Spanish. And I say, I have done it knowingly that whatever doesn't exist in English doesn't exist for the American Academy. And it's true. I mean, we don't read things in other languages for the most part. So it's part of the geopolitics of knowledge, the coloniality of knowledge that has to be transformed. At the same time, I think there are, I mean, I've been reading the book put together by the Design Studio for Social Intervention, which is a great, fascinating, really fascinating, very sophisticated, very complex framework explained in very simple terms in terms of three concepts: ideas, arrangements, and effects. Ideas create arrangements, arrangements create effects, and then the other way around and the other way around. And for instance, racism is a big idea, but how it is deployed in all of these arrangements in which we are, how white toxicity is part of that arrangement. And it's not even that people might do consciously. I mean, certainly a lot of white people do it consciously, but many don't. But it's part of those arrangements, and they will start to shift those arrangements to make change possible, to be able to really rearrange the social, as they put it, at a larger scale than just our immediate locality. So I was saying, this book, I mean, I hope this book is going to be translated to many different languages, to Arabic, to Kiswahili, to Hindi, to many different, to Spanish, obviously Portuguese, and so forth, and adapted by local groups, because it is a very interesting intervention into these sort of design fields.